welcome to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We're two physical therapists living the life in Las Vegas. I'm Dr. Erica.
And I'm Dr. Joe. We created this podcast for two reasons. First, to connect the healthcare, wellness, and fitness communities in Las Vegas. And second, to highlight all the amazing people we've met along the way.
Thank you for listening, and remember to take care of yourself.
Today's guest is Dillon Martin. He's currently serving as president of the Nevada Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. We talk about food, nutrition, and why diets don't typically work for people. Welcome to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We appreciate you coming on our show.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so tell us your name and tell us what you do.
So my name is Dillon Martin. I am a registered dietitian here in Southern Nevada.
Very cool. What brought you to Southern Nevada?
So I guess I should start by saying dietetics and becoming a dietitian is a second career for me. I moved to Las Vegas in 2002. I had graduated from Texas A&M University and then moved back home and really didn't quite know what I wanted to do, so I started looking for jobs online. My degree was in kinesiology.
Nice.
Yeah. And I was living with my dad, and I was like, I got to get out of here. So back then, it was a little bit harder to find jobs online. It was still mostly dial-up internet, and I found a job here in Las Vegas training at a health club and took the leap. I'd never lived outside of Texas, and I decided I'm going to move out here and see how it goes. I can always go back home if I want to. So that's what brought me out here. And then fast forward many years later, now I went back to school and got my license to become a registered dietitian.
What made you make the switch?
Make the switch to
dietitian from doing kinesiology?
Well, so I mean, I love personal training in the gym. I love my clients. I had an opportunity come up where I started doing like healthcare and medical supply sales for a period of time, and I ended up doing that for 8 years. And I liked it. Sales maybe isn't quite my thing. I don't think I'm a great salesperson, but I really, really missed working hands-on with patients and clients and trying to make a difference. So probably like a lot of healthcare practitioners, you decide, okay, I'm gonna do something in healthcare, and then you start combing through all the different professions: physical therapy, occupational therapy, physician assistant, nurse practitioner, nursing. Like, what am I going to do in healthcare? And for me, I'd always been, with my background in kinesiology, I did not go to physical therapy school following that degree, and nutrition just felt like a really good fit. I remember back in my first time around in college, I would lay on the floor of my apartment and dorm room, and I would look through nutrition magazines and look through like bodybuilding magazines. I'm not a bodybuilder, but that was kind of nutrition and fitness back in those days. And I was always intrigued by the different supplements and the different foods that people were eating. So when I had this chance to go back to school in 2014, it just felt like a good fit, and I probably wasn't really aware of nutrition as a career, but became more aware of it and really fell in love with dietetics.
I think that's interesting because magazines were our source of information, and there was no filter in between that, right? So you would get your bodybuilding magazine, and that was pretty much the information that you would receive, right? It's not like, I mean, you could go to the library and then go look for a book, but essentially that was the information that you're going to get, and that's going to be like the cream of the crop. This is the latest thing out there, right?
That was the best information. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go to the bookstore and buy a book, or get a magazine subscription.
Yeah, for sure. I remember in the 90s, a lot of my friends would read the bodybuilding magazines, even if that's not what they did. It's just that was the fitness magazine that you would think of. So, it's a totally different approach after you learn more in the future, but that's where a lot of people get their start, I think, is reading those.
And it's interesting, and this is a bigger discussion, but it's interesting how that kind of defined fitness and what health is for the future, because not everyone is a bodybuilder, not everyone wants to be, but that becomes kind of the image and the definition of health, even today for some people.
Oh, for sure, because that's all you see. That's all you're exposed to, so you just assume, oh, these people look fit. I guess they are, even though they probably get out of breath just going to get the doorbell.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see that evolve. As you were, looking at some of those nutrition things, how did you apply that as you were personal training and like getting into nutrition in general, because I feel like nutrition is very challenging because it's so personalized, right?
Yeah, right. So what I was probably looking for back then was the right supplement or the right diet or the magic bullet that was going to get you the results that you wanted. It was going to either build more muscle or get you in better shape. I think what I've learned now and how I apply that today is realizing that a lot of the things that we maybe see initially don't exactly work in the way that they're intended, or people don't have a good foundation of nutrition. So what I really work on today is, if someone has a supplement or they've read something or they have an idea that they've heard, we talk about how that fits into their lifestyle. Is how's that going to fit into their overall plan, and have they laid a good foundation first for, better eating?
So when people find you, or how do they find you, I guess would be like, how does this process start?
Well, for myself, I work, I guess we should say where I work. I work for Premise Health at the Caesars Health and Wellness Center in Las Vegas. So my patients are all employees at casinos or family and spouses. So that's who I'm reaching out to, and they find me either through, company newsletters or company announcements and word of mouth through other employees. But most employees are made aware of the Health and Wellness Center. So I'm not in the public, like necessarily marketing, or I don't have a website or anything like that yet. But that's how people find me at this point.
Gotcha. Do a pretty high % of the employees like think about nutrition and reach out and contact you?
I would say yes. I would say with COVID, people have become more and more mindful of their health. So people are reaching out. People are asking, hey, what do I need to do? I think the bigger challenge, though, is there's so much information out there about nutrition. There's so many places people can go. They get quickly overwhelmed, or they try to simplify what they're reading into, yes, I should eat this, and no, I shouldn't eat this. And that prevents them from ever coming and seeing a dietitian.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of diets are more diets of exclusion than anything else. Like people have a diet that's named, and it's like, we just can't eat these things, and then you're eating this diet.
Yeah.
Do you run into that a lot when people ask you questions about it?
All the time. People come in with, I heard I shouldn't eat this, or people will say this is good or this is bad, and that's like a simplification or a reductionism approach, and we see it all the time, not just in nutrition but across a lot of different professions. And whenever you have a world that has a massive amount of information, some of it reputable, some of it not, people don't know where to turn. So something that should be simple, like the foods that we put in our mouth, all of a sudden becomes a really complicated question. What we try to do as dietitians is we try to look at the individual and customize a plan that takes into consideration their background, their family needs, their medical needs, their cultural needs, and then just their goals. What do they want for their life? Because any diet plan will work, and then in the same breath, I'm going to say none of the diet plans out there really work. I mean, you can't restricting your way to better health probably isn't the best philosophy.
That's a good way of saying that. So when people come to see you, do they get their blood drawn, or do you have access to any kind of blood work or panels?
So fortunately, in our office, we have a multidisciplinary approach to healthcare, which is great. So we have nurses, we have our physicians, we have our nurse practitioner, our PA, our physical therapist, myself as a dietitian, the fitness center, all working under one roof. It's like a patient-centered medical home for everyone to come and get care. So it's great in that we can talk with each other, share goals, have a cohesive approach for the patient. I kind of think that's the direction that healthcare is going and should continue to go, is more and more disciplines working together under the same roof or working to care for the same patient. So yes, to answer your question, we do have access to labs, medical history, as well as referrals and information that we may get from hospitals or from specialists outside our office.
And do people, how does that model and essentially work? Because you did mention, like, is it who starts the process, or like in general, like how does someone enter the system into that healthcare model?
The patient. That's the beauty of the system, is that it's patient-centered. So the patient gets to choose where they come in. But often, if a patient were to come into a single office, so let's just use, for example, let's say they go into their doctor's office and it's a single practice. That doctor has to have set up referrals and know who to refer the patient to. And most doctors are great, they know that. But if the patient were to come into the office and not get those referrals or not follow through on those referrals, then it's really hard for the patient to get all the care that they need or to take advantage of all the services available to them. For me, sometimes people will come in with a question about nutrition, and they'll mention that they've had back pain or that they have a hard time moving, and then it's easy to introduce them to the physical therapist. Or I can see, this is your first time in our office and you're telling me you haven't had labs done in 2 years, then let's get you talking to our practitioner so that we can get some labs ordered for you. So the patient really gets to decide where they come into the medical model and how they want to get introduced, because not everyone wants to go see a doctor off from the start. Some people are fearful of going to see the doctor. If they're more comfortable coming to me, that's great. We can build that comfort, we can build that trust, and then introduce them to a system that's going to continue to follow up better with them.
I'm sure you get a wide variety of people coming into your practice, right? So what I guess in the beginning, you'll see people with a really solid foundation, or you'll see the opposite, where people have very fundamental. Mm-hmm. What does that kind of look like for you in terms of who you see?
It's all different. I mean, we're a corporate wellness facility, so we see people that are not retired. Mm-hmm. is what it amounts to. So patient ranges anywhere from 18 to 65, and then men, women, sometimes they'll bring in their children. It's a wide range of health conditions and a wide range of patients. So, but we do see a lot of patients living with diabetes. We deal with patients that want to lose weight. We deal with heart conditions, people that are post-surgery. You name it, we've probably seen it at some point. And some of it we don't do in our office, and then in that case we just refer out to, but we're there to help direct them where they need to go.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more about that post-surgical nutrition.
Post-surgical nutrition?
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about, what things people should, if they are planning to have a surgery or they have an unexpected surgery, what are things that they should consider when they're post-surgical? Okay.
So a lot of it's going to depend on what type of surgery they had. You're going to treat someone that had like an orthopedic surgery, very different from someone that had GI surgery. So let's just say someone had a GI surgery. You're going to look for are they tolerating their foods? Are they having any abdominal pain? Are they having any constipation, diarrhea, all those GI problems that might be follow-ups from surgery? Mm-hmm. What types of foods are they eating? Sometimes there's a transition from softer foods or foods that are more easily digestible to a reintroduction to more fibrous foods. So immediately post-surgery, of course, most patients are going to be on more of a liquid type diet, and then as they transition to weeks out from their surgery, you get back more into eating some of the regular foods that they're used to eating. One thing that we have to be mindful of post-surgery is that the patient's healing. So we usually are going to recommend increasing their protein intake, either through supplements or through protein-rich foods.
And do you go through that plan with somebody if they had an accident or something, that you have that plan or access to you to help consult them with that?
Absolutely. And I should mention that there's dietitians in the hospital that work in the clinical setting, And that's where the patient gets the first introduction to what they're going to need nutritionally after they leave the hospital. So they get it while they get that introduction to nutrition while they're in the hospital, and then they can go see a dietitian after they get out of the hospital. And I've recently learned there's actually jobs where certain insurances might utilize a dietitian for automatic post-surgical follow-up. So someone that's going to reach out to the patient and see how they're doing with their nutrition versus making the patient do that follow-up on their own.
How often do you follow up with people typically in after that?
It depends. I would say that the typical follow-up is usually monthly, but for someone that's post-surgical, you might talk to them and then check in with them 2 weeks later, or set a follow-up for 2 weeks and then do a couple of 2-week follow-ups and then stretch it out to monthly and then maybe just once every 2 months. I think most dietitians make themselves available either by phone or email if patients do have questions in between sessions.
So if people have questions, do they just directly call you, or how do they get in touch with you?
Usually calling or contacting through the EMR system.
Mm. And when you begin with patients, you were saying that you mentioned whatever their goals are. So if there's somebody that's maybe a performer in a show, like you could see or someone that's dealing cards, that they might have very, very different goals as far as what they're trying to approach.
For sure. Someone that, like you mentioned, Joe, someone that's a performer is going to have very, very different goals from someone that maybe is older, maybe someone that is confined or has a disability, restricted movement. Very, very different goals for those types of people.
What's something that you commonly see and you wish more people knew about?
Something I commonly see and I wish more people knew about. That's a good question. Let me think about it this way. So nutritionally, something we commonly see is lack of consistency. So what I wish more people knew about, or what I wish people would kind of take away, is that you can make a small change for a long period of time and have a really dramatic effect on your health. So I guess what I wish more people knew about was the power of small changes done consistently over a long period of time, rather than looking for a diet that they're going to do for 30 days or looking for a specific supplement that they can take. I wish people just really knew, like, hey, I can drink more water for a year. That will help my health and nutrition. I can eat more fruits and vegetables, and I can do that for a whole year, and that's going to help my nutritional status. So what I wish people knew was, and people had more of that mindset of, I'm going to do something very grounded in science, but I'm going to do that for a long period of time.
So being in the desert, do you also run into patients that for some reason don't want to drink a lot of water? Like we've worked with several people that they just are not super interested in drinking water, even though they live somewhere that's really hot.
All the time. All the time. Some people go through their day and they're just busy and we don't think about it. We may not remember to drink water. It may not be convenient. We're either talking with other people. A lot of my patients are working in the casino, so they're running around. They have jobs that keep them on their feet, and they don't have that break to go and get water. So they get to the end of the day, and you're feeling dehydrated. So yes, even though that we're in the desert, still get people that don't drink a lot of water. And then not everyone's outside, right? I mean, even though we're in the desert, a lot of us are in 70-degree temperatures most of the days. We're not getting outside into the sunshine, so that's another reason. And I find some people have just lost touch with their sense of thirst. And then other people have replaced water with other fluids, which is sometimes okay. They're still getting hydration if you're drinking coffee. You're still getting hydration if you're drinking juice. But water as a source of nourishment, because our bodies need water, is still probably the best.
And you probably get asked this a lot, but you touched on it a little bit earlier. Are there any foods that you would recommend probably not eating, or there are certain ingredients in foods that might actually be harmful that people don't realize? Because you always hear people talk about trans fats, and I would always joke that the only place I can find trans fat anymore is the movie theater nacho cheese.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for me to get my allotment of trans fat in.
It is. The government has done a good job of reducing and putting regulations on the amount of trans fats that can be found in food. On the food labels, most food labels will show 0 trans fats, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. You can still have a little bit of trans fat in the food, up to 0.5 gram, and the nutrition labels will still reflect 0. But as a whole across the United States, there's been a big push to reduce the amount of trans fat. So rarely is that my biggest concern whenever I'm talking to patients at this point, unless maybe they're eating a large amount of fried foods.
So why is trans fat harmful? Or I guess what does it do?
Yeah. So trans fat. So we're going to get into a little bit of physiology here, but I know you probably remember this. The carbon chain. Does that sound familiar? So you got the carbon chain. The way that the hydrogens attach to the carbons. In a saturated fat, every carbon has a hydrogen bond to it. And then in a trans fat, what happens is some of those hydrogen bonds get repositioned. So it's not a matter of them being taken away, but it's the way the molecule is shaped. Okay, so let's say you have this molecule that's going into your body that's shaped a certain way. The trans fats are more likely to kind of get stuck to the blood vessel wall, and so you're more likely to like build up a clot over time with the trans fats.
Okay. Are there any other things? I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I was just going to, so ultimately what trans fats can lead to is a greater risk of heart disease. And that's what patients should be concerned about.
Gotcha. Are there any other or things or chemicals that people should maybe look for in the food labels when they're reading what's in their food?
I'm always a proponent of trying to find foods that are either single food items like an apple or walnuts or broccoli, where maybe there isn't even a label. But if you're looking at a label, maybe try to look for labels that have fewer ingredients on there. That can sometimes be a way to kind of find foods that are maybe a little bit more nourishing to your body. But I don't want people to leave this conversation thinking that they have to be afraid of everything on the food label. There are different natural flavors, additives, preservatives, dyes that are added into food. And it hasn't really been clearly proven that all of those are harmful.
Gotcha. Okay.
What does a natural flavor mean?
What's a natural flavor?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Natural flavor. So a natural flavor means that the flavoring is derived from natural sources.
So not necessarily from whatever
So it's not
product like say for example, you have a chip or something that has natural flavors in it. That's just something that describes like maybe salt or pepper or like something like that.
Not so much that, but let's say you have a chip. So let's say you have like a chip that's like tortilla flavored chip, like a Mexican flavored chip.
Mm-hmm.
They've used natural flavors to enhance they've used natural flavors to enhance the flavoring of the chip to make it to heighten your senses, to make it more appealing, to make it more palatable, to make it more enjoyable. But those natural flavors weren't synthetically made in a lab.
Okay, so they're derived from natural
Exactly,
sources.
they're derived from natural sources. So they might use various plant sources or natural animal sources to derive those natural flavors.
What would be an example of something made in the lab that you commonly see? What's xanthan gum? I feel like I see that very often, but I don't know what that is either.
Yeah, so xanthan gum is derived. Oh gosh, you guys, you pulled out a good one. I've got to look and see where exactly xanthan gum is derived from.
Oh, that's okay. You don't have to answer that one, but just in general, what would be an example of a chemically made or a laboratory made
Food-like substance?
Yeah, like,
Food-
so
right.
you see, like, if you look at a label that's very processed, you look at it and you're like, I don't know what all 9 things of those are, but I saw potato. Right? You
Okay.
see potato, and then you see all the other things, but you don't really know what else all those other things are.
A lot of those other things are stabilizers. They're preservatives used to increase the shelf life of the food. They're like anti-caking agents. So if you have a food that's going to be stored in a package for an extended amount of time, it's shipped to the grocery store, it's going to sit on the shelf for a while. You don't want all those things in the bag to be sticking together. So whenever you pull it out, you pull it. So they're anti-caking agents. They're emulsifiers, which I guess I should define what emulsifier is. That's going to, let's say you have like a mayonnaise, the emulsifier might be in there to hold the ingredients together so that they don't separate. It holds that emulsion.
So like
Those
in
are-
peanut butter, like for example, like a natural peanut butter, you see the separation of the oil and then
Exactly.
okay. So
Now-
so essentially an emulsifier would be you get a regular peanut butter from I don't know whatever things that they put in, but you don't have to stir that. Okay, gotcha.
So a good example is, let's say a natural flavor would be lavender. So I'm going to add like lavender essence to this food.
Potato chip.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe to a
I like
potato
it.
chip.
You should do that.
That's going to be an example of a natural flavor. It's something that comes from nature. They don't necessarily have to write that they put lavender in there, but they can just write natural flavors on the food label because they're putting a combination of different natural flavors.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's always kind of crazy because whenever I read the back of a food label, I mean, there are tons of words on there I can't even pronounce. I'm like, I don't know what this really is.
I know, and some of them are scary. And like I said, I don't want people to be scared of them. That being said, I think nutritionally, the foods that probably provide the most nutrient density that I tend to try to get my clients to gravitate towards are things that are just whole food ingredients, natural foods that are either plant-based or animal-based lean proteins.
So probably something that was alive at one point.
Something that was alive at one point that you can pretty easily identify that maybe hasn't been so remade in a food lab.
Gotcha. So what would be your favorite cheat meal?
My favorite cheat meal.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't really like the term cheat meal.
How about meal?
How would
that
you describe
know-
it? Like something that you like really enjoy, but you probably shouldn't eat that much of often.
So I think we all go through phases, right? Like sometimes there's things that I kind of crave that I'm like, okay, that was really, really good. And so I'm going to give you an example. Last night we made monkey bread at the house. Have you ever had monkey bread?
Like the frozen one?
Love
Like
monkey bread.
What's
Monkey
that?
bread.
it's like cinnamon stuff, right? Like
Yeah,
cinnamon.
it's basically bread, and then you pour butter and sugar over the top of it, and it caramelizes into this nice dessert. We like to do ours in a bundt pan.
Nice.
Yeah, it's probably not something that I want to eat every night, but my daughter made some last night. It was delicious. We had it after dinner, so I don't call that a cheat meal necessarily. Granted, that wasn't necessarily planned. We didn't know that we were going to be making that last night. But I was able to incorporate it into my diet. Having a generally healthy diet all the time allows you to incorporate some of those foods that maybe we know that we shouldn't always be eating. But the concept of a cheat meal, like I'm going to go out and splurge and purposefully overeat, or I'm going to purposefully go out and eat a whole pizza or a triple stacker hamburger. Yes, I mean, sometimes we do. And if you enjoy those, then that's great. Go enjoy them every once in a while. But I think doing it on purpose is a little bit more harmful than good.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So as a dietitian, and maybe even how you got into it, have you experimented with certain types of diets, if you will, like, or different like methods of eating, like intermittent fasting or like Whole30 or, think just to name a few, but have you done that yourself?
Sure. Yeah. You're always experimenting with different things. So the one time you mentioned Whole30, I have done the Whole30 diet. I found that one didn't work so well for me. And so let's take that as an example of why maybe it didn't work well for me. One, I like to endurance train. Okay, so it wasn't enough food. It wasn't enough food for me. I need a little bit of more carbohydrate in my diet. It just was a little bit too restrictive for me. The other reason is it just wasn't quite sustainable long term. There's going to be times where we want to have some monkey bread, or I want to watch a movie and have some Skittles or some dark chocolate. Those are things that I like to incorporate in my life in small amounts. And so saying that like I'm on this particular plan, whether it's Whole30 or something else, that's where nutrition becomes very individualized. And that's what I want people to take away and understand, is that you're not wrong. You haven't failed if you can't necessarily stick to someone else's plan or something that someone else has written in a book or a magazine. You have to take the information and make it your own and individualize it. And that's really where dietitians offer the greatest service in being able to help with that. And also, dietitians are going to take into consideration different medical conditions like diabetes, like heart disease.
And probably activity level.
And activity level,
If
absolutely.
they're an endurance athlete versus strength athlete, things like that. Mm-hmm. So as far as the endurance versus strength athletes, what would be some of the differences that you would look at? So if someone says, I'm a marathon runner, or someone comes in and says, I'm just an Olympic lifter and that's all I do, how would you approach those two differently?
Well, I mean, there's going to be differences for sure. Surprisingly, there's going to be a lot of similarities too. Now, I should say I'm not a sports dietitian, so I don't work with those patients regularly. But the two most important things that I would probably start to look for would be what's their calorie intake? Are they getting enough calories in to sustain their level of activity and their sport? Because if they're under eating, then inevitably it could lead to more injuries. It could lead to overtraining. So you've got to make sure that they're getting enough energy to fuel their athletic endeavors. And then protein, making sure that they're getting plenty of protein in their diet. It doesn't have to be an exorbitant amount, but you want to make sure that it's right for that individual and right for that individual's goals. So the general recommendation for protein, it varies a lot depending on the athlete. So I'm a little bit hesitant to give like specifics because I don't want anyone to take that and be like, oh, that's exactly what I need. But athletes can be successful off as 1.2 grams per kilogram, but some athletes may need up to like 2.5 grams per kilogram of protein.
So how can you identify if somebody is under eating?
Good question. So a couple of different ways. It's going to be a little bit different whether we're talking about a male or a female. But here's some things that someone might look for. And as much as we talk about overeating being a problem, undereating is definitely a problem as well. Not just for young people, but also for aging adults. Undereating can be a problem too. Lots of things you can look for. Weight loss is probably the most obvious. If you are continuing to lose weight, you might be undereating. And let's just say if you're losing weight and you don't need to lose weight, or you're not trying to lose weight, then that's definitely undereating could be an issue. If you're having any, especially for someone that's out of the hospital or someone that is maybe aging, if you're having swallowing problems and you can't quite find the right foods to eat, then undereating could be a problem as well. We'll talk for a minute about athletes. If you are constantly fatigued and feeling like you're overtrained, you need to look at what you're taking in each day and realize if undereating could be a source of some of that fatigue. I think you also need to look at how healthy are you trying to eat, because you can actually eat too healthy. All right? So if your diet just consists of salads, it's going to be pretty much impossible. We're not cows. We aren't meant to live off just plants alone, not just salads and grasses. So it's going to be really, really hard to get the amount of energy you need from not having a diverse diet. So another way that you could look and see if you're under eating is maybe, is there enough diversity in your diet? Am I eating a lot of different foods, or am I eating the same thing for 3 meals a day? If so, it's possible that you're under eating. Another thing, you can look at some of certain things, like if you have osteoporosis, that's a sign that for females in particular that they could be under eating if you get diagnosed with osteoporosis. The other thing is if you feel like that your menstrual cycles are not normal, or if they've changed dramatically, or if you've lost your menstrual cycle, that can be a sign of under eating as well.
So, as far as older adults, it's interesting you mentioned that too. That's one population you don't always think about for under eating, but is a lot of it too that maybe sometimes people get into the habits where they just don't eat throughout the day, or they don't eat till a certain time, or they're used to having someone always prepare food for them?
I would say the number one thing is probably just what you touched on, Joe, is food preparation. As we age, it becomes harder to move around the kitchen, to feel like cooking and preparing foods. We get a little bit more sedentary, and we just get out of the habit of eating at those, consistent meals and getting enough nutrition. We look for more like easy to prepare foods as we age. So for some older adults, that could definitely be a problem. Of course, if you've had an injury and it's hard for you to move around and you're immobile, it becomes all that much more important to have some sort of social system, that someone, a friend, a family member, that's checking in on you and looking after you and making sure that you're getting regular nourishment each day.
There's sometimes too where I am in the kitchen or something. I'm like, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to go through that preparation process. What are your favorite ways to prepare meals? Maybe want to talk about some things that you enjoy, the foods that you enjoyed.
Yeah, we all do that. We all go through times where it's like, oh, I just don't want to cook something, or I just want something quick and easy. One thing that before I tell you my favorite foods that we'll touch on, that I'm really excited about, is just the number of meal delivery companies and meal delivery services that have been popping up. I mean, if you look on the internet, you can find a bunch of different options. But I mean, it's really nice. It's convenient for people. It makes it easy, and they're becoming more and more tailored to someone's individual lifestyle or individual needs. And as a dietitian, I've got a couple that I tend to recommend to people if they're looking for that. Yes, there is the added expense of either having the ingredients shipped to you and then you cooking the individual ingredients, or the other option is the meals are ready made and all you have to do is either consume them or put them in the microwave or the stovetop for a few minutes, heat them up, and then eat them. But I think those are really convenient. And for someone that's looking to maybe change their nutrition but doesn't quite know where to start, or is just maybe has a really busy lifestyle and just needs some help, I think those meal delivery services are really good. Some of my favorite things to eat. So whenever I was in college and growing up, I worked as a waiter. And our family owned a restaurant called the Bluebonnet Cafe. It was in Texas. It was a well-known restaurant in the area of Texas that it was in, but it wasn't a chain or a franchise or anything like that. So most people wouldn't know it. But it was a small cafe. It was owned by my granddad and my grandmother, and they operated it for over 50 years. So some of my favorite flavors I can't get anymore because the restaurant, it's been shut down. My grandparents have unfortunately passed away. So those flavors, though, like, I don't have a picture of the food, but I know those flavors. I know the smells of the restaurant and exactly how the food tasted, and those are some of my favorite things. So the Bluebonnet chicken fried steak, the Bluebonnet chocolate cream pie, those are things that stick with me, and I can't get them anymore, unfortunately, but those are some of my favorite foods. I grew up in Texas, so I do like barbecue and some of the great southern flavors, cornbread. Gosh, what else? I love vegetables, all different types, roasted vegetables as well as raw vegetables. My other grandparents on my dad's side of the family were farmers, and so every summer we would be in my grandmother's garden, either picking green beans or picking fresh peaches off the tree. And again, some of those flavors and smells and the way the food felt, because you would have to take it from the garden back up to the house. I don't have a picture of that, but I've got a taste. I know exactly what those foods tasted like. I know what the house smelled like. I know what my grandmother's chocolate chip cookies tasted like. They were delicious, and I remember, sneaking into the kitchen at night or going into the kitchen and grabbing a few extra chocolate chip cookies after watching some TV. So I think those are some of my favorite things and some of my favorite memories. And what I want people to take from that is understanding that those flavors and those smells that you grew up with are really, really powerful. And you shouldn't have to give those up, which is one of the main reasons I say, you don't have to follow someone else's diet. There's always a way to incorporate those things that you grew up with, those flavors that you love and enjoy, into a nutrition plan that's going to work for you for your long-term health.
So when people first start learning to eat, such as when they were kids, kids seem to be really picky. When I was a kid, I only wanted, I think, pizza, burgers, and nachos, which I'm still fond of all those today. But I eat a lot more things too, and I eat a lot more vegetables and everything else. So how do you go about, training your kid how to eat correctly? I don't know if that's the right way of saying it.
Yeah, I think that's okay. I think, first of all, as a parent, we need to first of all identify a little bit of what is the problem. Is the child a picky eater, or is there a medical reason that maybe they would be limiting certain foods? Those are two very different things. So what I'm talking about is if you're listening to this and your child has autism or some other thing, some other reason that they tend to restrict foods, then that really requires a dietitian that's a specialist, as well as mental health and your physician all getting on the same page of how we're going to address that child's food needs, because that's very different. Now, if it's just someone that's like my kids, like my one daughter is a little bit picky, there's certain things that she doesn't like, that's very different, and that can be addressed by the parent working with the dietitian, because what we found is that kids naturally don't like something the first time that they're introduced to it. If you give a child a big plate of broccoli, they probably aren't going to eat it the first time they see it. What parents don't realize is that it can take up to 20 times of presenting the child with that food before they'll accept it, before they'll try it, before they'll start to incorporate it into their palate and try the food. So 20 times is that's a long time that you have to keep offering. And that can be very frustrating for parents. They're like, I gave you broccoli, eat it, try a bite. No, we really want to hold back. We want the child to make that decision. We want them to accept the food without necessarily encouraging them. But as a parent, you can model it. You can definitely put the food on the table, include fruits and vegetables at dinner time, and model that behavior. You eat them yourself and model for the child that those foods are safe to eat and they're delicious. And after 20 times, yes, the child may actually try it and eat it and learn to love that food just like you do.
I feel like even as I've gotten older, I've still kind of done that for myself. There are some things I didn't eat growing up and wasn't really exposed to it, just from either where you lived or whatever you used to in restaurants. So then as I got older, I thought, that's kind of weird I don't eat this. Like pickles, for instance, I didn't really like them. And I just kept eating them because I worked in a sandwich shop.
Yeah.
I just forced myself to eat pickles all the time. And then eventually I liked them. And there's the same thing with coffee and red wine and multiple things that I like right now. I just kept trying it until eventually not only did I like it, but then you can really differentiate the taste in between those different things.
So when you were working the sandwich shop, you started liking pickles after you were working there?
Well, I had to force myself to eat them, though, because I was one of the only people there that didn't eat pickles. And that was a really quick and easy thing to grab for a snack while you're at a sandwich shop. And then the first time I ate one, I was like, I don't really like pickles. But I had never really ate them growing up. I just would keep eating them until one day I'm fine with them.
I think that's interesting, and I think often, maybe no one else thinks about this, but I do. If I move to another part of the world and live there, I'm sure my taste would start to change and I would start to incorporate more foods that were from that part of the world. I mean, how much of what we eat is just based on our environment? I think a large part of it. But you're right, the first time you try pickles, or maybe you might find that there's a certain brand of pickles that you like more than others. If you've ever had a pickle made from one type of cucumber versus another, it's going to make a difference. So in addition to that, not only do you have to try pickles, you have to try different types from different regions that are made in different ways, different spices. Same thing with kids. If you're trying to maybe introduce carrots, cooked, raw, sauteed, put them with a little bit of, do them with garlic, do them with ginger, do them with a little bit of brown sugar. There's so many different ways that we can consume the same food. We don't have to limit ourselves to just one method.
So do you feel too that kids have a different sense of taste or different palate, and that maybe it's just that it's not also as developed yet, or they taste foods maybe differently?
Definitely, as kids grow up, they develop their likeness for sweet foods typically first, and then some of the stronger flavors like really bitter or sour flavors, those take a little bit longer to develop, and they're a little bit harder for kids to develop. And sometimes if we don't introduce things that are bitter and sour and salty, kids may not develop the sense of those flavors.
So in a sense, just being open to trying different types of things at different times in their life too, so they can expand that palate. Because I feel like you can develop in general, but I feel like it's more challenging when you're older.
Yeah, absolutely. And a good practical way to do that is you can't introduce all these new flavors at once. Introduce them one by one or maybe two at a time. So if you think of your child's nutrition in terms of, I'm going to give them two things that I know that they enjoy, and I'm going to give them one or two new foods, or maybe a food that they've had. Maybe you give it prepared in a slightly different way. Mix it up and give them something that you know that they'll eat, but then also offer some new things at each meal.
What would you consider mindful eating, or not being distracted while you're eating?
So I think many of us today have very rushed lifestyles, and that we could all benefit greatly from slowing down and paying attention to how the food tastes, how we feel while we're eating that food, how full the food makes us feel. I think those are all things that are important to pay attention to while you're eating. And if we're distracted, if we are eating in our car, if we are rushed, if we don't take the time to sit down to a meal, it's really hard to pick up on what's happening with our bodies and how that food is making us feel inside. So for our families, we really had to make a rule. Okay, no screens, no TV, no iPhone while we're eating. I think it's a good rule. It just makes us slow down. Take a little bit of time out for yourself. Think of food as supplying your body with energy and giving yourself some self-care. I think a lot of people could really benefit from just being more mindful when they're eating.
I love that. What's something that you've been working on, whether it's professionally, personally, physically, or mentally, that you're excited about?
So I've kind of said this, I think, a couple times, is I really believe in habit change. Mm-hmm. That habit change is one of the best ways to approach nutrition. It's about incorporating simple changes over a long period of time. So one of the most things I'm most excited about, and one of the things I'm still working on, is I have different habits that I'm working on. Like, for instance, when I got out of school, I knew that my amount of exercise that I was getting needed to improve. So I didn't go out and start running 8 miles a day. I would sometimes wake up in the morning and not feel great, so I would just get down on my floor and stretch, or I would do some yoga, or I would maybe get on the treadmill and walk. I think I watched the whole Game of Thrones series just walking on the treadmill. But what I'm really proud of is the fact that regardless of how I was feeling that day, I always did something for my body. And now I'm well over 2 years now without missing a day of doing some little something for my body. Sometimes it's a 2-hour bike ride, and other times it's a 5-minute stretch. So yes, it varies that much, but always taking that little time out for myself. And then the other habit I'm working on kind of in that same line is journaling, just keeping a self-journal that I can refer back to. And I've been able to do that habit now for over 150 days in a row, which is really nice. And so these little habits, whether it's drinking more water or eating more vegetables, like you can apply the same principle to nutrition.
How about professionally? I know you are involved with some professional organization. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So I'm president right now of the Nevada Academy of Nutrition Dietetics. My term is up in June, and we've got a great president-elect that's going to be taking over, Maddie, who you both know. Yep, mm-hmm. Exactly. I'm really proud of that as well, getting involved with that organization and saying, once I graduated from school, once I earned my license, how can I give back to the profession? How can I meet more dietitians and more professionals here in our state? How can we get the word out about our profession and help it to grow and make a difference? So if you're listening to this and you're a health professional, I would highly encourage you to get involved with your professional organization. I'm sure that there's one here locally. If you're listening to this and you just want to volunteer and get involved in your community, I think that's really important as well, just to give back. There's also organizations here in town that if you're interested in nutrition and want to get involved in food and the food supply and learn more about nutrition, there's organizations like 3 Square that are happily accepting volunteers and need volunteers to help keep those businesses and those nonprofit organizations running.
And how can people find you?
So you can find me in a couple of ways. We talked about this at the beginning. I'm working on the website and building that up, but you'll be able to find me on my website at dillonmartin.net. So that's DILLONMARTIN.net. And then also look me up on Instagram. I'm not great at social media as far as making regular posts, but if you send me a message on social media, I will respond. And that is Dillon, DILLON, my middle initial J, and then my last name Martin. So Dillon J. Martin is where you'll find me on Instagram.
Okay. And what do you want to leave listeners with?
Just if you're looking to improve your nutrition, I highly recommend that you contact a dietitian. You can always go to the Nevada Academy website and get in touch with us, and we can point you in the right direction. So that website is eatrightnevada.org. The other thing I want to leave people with is don't give up and don't get frustrated. If you have questions about something you've read about nutrition or heard, there's an answer that's right for you. We just need to explore it a little bit to find that. So don't assume that just because you've tried something and it didn't work for you and that you failed. Let's just explore how we can make it work for you in the future.
Very good. Well, really appreciate you being on the show.
I appreciate
your knowledge.
it. Thanks for allowing me to share my thoughts and ideas with you.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Dillon.
Thanks.
We'd like to thank you for listening to La Vida Las Vegas podcast. We hope you enjoyed the time with our guest as much as we did. It would help us out so much if you could share, subscribe, or review our podcast or any combination of the three. Thanks again, and remember to take care of yourself.